Hello and welcome. We are so glad that you are joining us for this SACAC webinar and sensitivity training. I had the opportunity to go through this training firsthand as a faculty member and participant in Dry Run 2018, and it was one of the most fantastic professional development opportunities that I've had, and we are so thrilled to share it with you today. If this is your first time joining us for a SACAC webinar, welcome. There are a few things that you should know. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. At any time during the presentation, you can click that and ask a question. We might integrate it live into the presentation, or at the end, we'll have dedicated time to question and answer. So don't hesitate to reach out with that. You also have a mute button, and so make sure that your sound isn't on in case you're multitasking. And if you need to leave at any time, know that the webinar is recorded and you'll be able to refer back to it on the SACAC website. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Lopez. I'm the Assistant Director of Undergrad Admissions for the University of Kentucky. I also serve as a regional rep, so I live here in the state of Georgia and work with all Georgia families with what I do for a living. I've served on many committees and participated in lots of training when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I was also a participant of Dry Run in 2015, as well as a Dry Run faculty member where I met all of these wonderful colleagues in 2017 and 2018, and we're really excited to have this conversation today. Next, we have Aisha. Aisha.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Aisha Regan. I serve as the Assistant Director of the Campus Visit Experience at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I've recruited both in-state and out-of-state populations working with freshmen and transfer students for the past 4 years. I currently serve over our Campus Visit Experience and advise our tour guides. And I, like Christina, have served on Dry Run faculty where I met these lovely people. We did this training for our participants last year.
Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Vaughn. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Diversity Recruitment at Elon University in North Carolina. I do live in North Carolina. Have had the pleasure of being in this role for the past 3 years and recruit students of diverse populations all over the country. I do have a specific focus in Black and African American recruitment. Had the pleasure of working with all of these people last summer, which has been a true privilege to keep up and do this work, but have worked with our diversity ambassador tour guides on a couple of scholarship committees, some marketing materials that we do for students of diverse populations here at Elon. I'm needed in different areas to serve our students. Have been at Elon for about 4 years and have enjoyed every second of it. So thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Charlotte Wahle. I am currently an admissions counselor at Southwest Minnesota State University in Marshall, Minnesota. But previously, I was at Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas, which is how I got connected with these folks in SACAC. I've been working in higher ed for the past 6 years and admissions for 4. I've had a couple of different opportunities for different kinds of diversity training as well as safe zone training. So I feel really privileged to have had those learning opportunities and to continue to learn and learn everything I have from these folks over the past year or so. So looking forward to being here today.
Howdy, my name is Crystal Riles. I'm a senior regional advisor with Texas A&M University. I am regionally based in Atlanta, and I've served in higher ed for the past 7 years. My experiences have kind of expanded my knowledge in targeted recruitment, financial aid, freshman, transfer, international, and non-traditional populations. I've also served as an admissions liaison for the Black Former Student and Hispanic Former Student Diversity Initiative programs at Texas A&M. And I have served on Dry Run faculty in 2017 as well as 2018, which is how I met these wonderful people. And I'm so excited to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Stephen Warner. I am the Assistant Director for Freshman Admissions at Georgia Southern University. I have been with Georgia Southern for about 7 years. Started off recruiting our out-of-state students from North and South Carolina, all the way up through Pennsylvania, and then recently transitioned into a role where I work now with predominantly our students coming in from Georgia and working with our recruiters to make sure they're recruiting all over, and I'm being able to support them and their initiatives. And so I'm excited to be here. I was dry run faculty with this group last year and was able to present at SACAC just last week. So this is a really fun ride, and we're excited to talk to you today.
Now that you've gotten all the introductions about who we are and our backgrounds, I now just want to quickly share a little bit more to set the scene for today's presentation. We are all admission professionals, but we are not full experts. We are just extremely passionate about this particular topic. We've had our own various experiences, and we're just really excited to start a dialogue and a discussion, not just within the webinar, but hope that you can all bring it within your individual offices as well. We do want to set the tone for a very respectable environment. We want to make sure that we're respecting each other in our questions and in our answers, so we're very intentional about that. And please know, like Erin said at the very end, we will certainly open this conversation up to questions or comments that you have, because we really want to continue this discussion all the way through after the hour that we have together. So I'm now going to turn it over to Crystal, and she is going to be kicking it off with talking about diversity.
Awesome. So diversity, when you hear and see that word, what do you think of? How would you define diversity? So the dictionary definition is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, variety. That's more so when we're talking about an individual. When we're considering a group, it's the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures. Now, as a panel, we define diversity as everyone, because we're all different in so many ways, which is the beauty of it all. But I want to put the emphasis in that second definition on inclusion. We want to identify these differing elements to include these people or groups rather than exclude them. When we speak about diversity in education, I think some may naturally default to the idea that this only includes racial groups and increasing those that are underrepresented. Now, don't get me wrong, this is absolutely important to acknowledge and take the steps to advance, but there are also other elements to consider in that process. This brings me to the words surrounding diversity on the slide: geographic, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, political, religion. We as individuals would check off these boxes with different responses. So keep that in mind when you're researching what diversity looks like at your campus and how to grow that, okay? As far as diversity initiatives, that will look different at every single campus, because you have to consider the current state of that campus and what the goals are in growth. An example would be a state school that maybe wants to break into the national market and bring in more students outside of their state. Their diversity initiative would likely include national recruitment, as they would provide more resources to target that specific population and grow it. An institution that may already have a more racially diverse student population, they may look further into their individual colleges and how they can grow within those areas. Like engineering, that field is seeking more women, so their diversity initiative may include targeting women in STEM. So those are just a few examples to help encourage you to keep an open mind when you're having these conversations on where your campus stands and how you want to grow. Okay, this brings me to my next slide. Okay, on the left, you'll see a map of the US. This is an ancestry map that reflects what the majority population identifies as within that state. So take a moment, look it over. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as showing where our nation stands today. Now I want to direct your attention to the list and numbers on the right side. This is what we call a diversity index. So the US News and World Report, they calculate the diversity index of universities across the nation. This helps to determine what campuses have the most diverse student populations. This is done for those students who may want to consider the racial and ethnic diversity of a college campus as they're exploring their school options. Now, a diversity index ranges from 0 to 1. The closer a school's number is to 1, the more diverse the student population is. It's just interesting to me to see these specific schools in the top 5 of their list in comparison to the ancestry map on the left. This just goes to show that regardless of the makeup of the surrounding city, a college campus can be diverse in so many different ways. So I say this all to you to keep in mind when you start having these conversations about diversity and growth. Now I'm going to pass it off to Courtney.
Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. So as we talk about diversity, we already mentioned there are so many different areas of diversity. That's why we're not calling this multicultural recruitment, because we're talking more than just culture or just race and ethnicity, but really encompassing all different ways that make us different. A point that we have focused on here at Elon is gender and sexuality, and really making sure that our campus and our recruitment process is welcoming and open to students who identify within the community. So you'll see that we have LGBTQIA. I think sometimes the I and A are not listed in different campuses. Here on our campus we do, which mean intersex and asexual. So we want to be sure that we encompass all students that are in that group. You'll see different questions to ask your institution, and these are really here so that you are able to have the answers when students ask these questions. I think we can all agree that there is nothing worse than a student asking a question about student life and you're just sitting there thinking, oh, well, I'll just pass it on, or I'll pass on this contact information. But being equipped with the answers to these types of questions is really important. At Elon, we have the GLC, which is the Gender and LGBTQIA Center. That is a really important and imperative campus partner that we have in the Office of Admissions, and we have some fantastic leadership over there that works very closely with us to make sure that we are being inclusive of students who identify within said community. On the right-hand side, you'll see Campus Pride. This is a really fantastic resource and index, and we'll keep talking about resources throughout this presentation to use to see how this index is calculating what makes up an LGBTQ-friendly college or university. A lot of times it has to do with staff, office, programs, etc. that we have. And you see that it has something about the trans housing policy. These are going to be different on every single college campus, but being equipped and knowing what those are becomes really important. On the bottom panel, you'll see it says LGBTQIA, and it has 3 columns of numbers. This was directly from us here at Elon and us keeping track of students who identify in the community, making sure we can keep up with different resources and information to them. That middle number is so high, and that year we were thrilled. We were like, oh my gosh, we have students who identify, who are openly identifying at the inquiry stage that they are LGBTQIA. And then there was this massive dip the year after. We were really racking our brains about what all was going on with those numbers and why was it so high one year and low another. We're in North Carolina, so we certainly had some political things going on in our state which affected that. But also we were realizing that students were asking, does this count if I'm an ally? Which we were thrilled about. We were so excited that students who are allies of the community wanted to identify and wanted to receive information and such. But when we sat down and had conversations here in admissions and with our campus partners, we realized that we really wanted to learn about students who are identify within the community. We appreciate the allyship of students during the process, but ultimately we wanted to be able to communicate specifically and effectively with students who identified within the community. So we had to be more clear about what all of the letters mean in the acronym, which is why I mentioned the I and the A kind of up front in this process. But using the Campus Pride Index has been a really fantastic tool and resource for us. They also put on different college fairs throughout the year and country, which are fantastic investments for your college or university to invest in, should this be a population that you choose to begin focusing on. I'm now going to turn it over to Charlotte, who will discuss kind of why we even have a fear of having these conversations.
Okay, so we just want to take a minute to stop and kind of acknowledge the fact that sometimes it's a little scary to have these conversations, whether it's just with colleagues or with families or students you might be working with. And so we want to talk about, maybe where is that fear coming from, right? Maybe you don't want to inadvertently say something discriminatory because you don't feel like you know enough. Maybe you're just afraid of offending someone because you're going to say it wrong, or come off as seeming ignorant. And I think sometimes there's also this fear of, acknowledging our privilege, right? I think I want to take a moment and acknowledge that, right? You guys can see my video. I am a white woman. I'm also cisgendered, and I'm straight. And so there have been times when I didn't want to speak up because I didn't want to seem, like I was just flaunting my privilege again. But I want to take a minute and talk about why we do encourage everyone to have these conversations in your office, with your colleagues, with your folks you're working with. It's a lot of different things, right? The only way to learn is by having these conversations, by speaking up, by asking questions. And you may be the only one that actually feels comfortable or feels brave enough to do that. So speak up, because you might be helping someone else out who isn't yet comfortable asking. Maybe you can ask and clear up misunderstanding for somebody else. So maybe you do actually know, the answer, but you speak up to help others. Or maybe you speak up because you have that privilege and you can voice a concern that then helps folks, underrepresented groups that maybe don't feel comfortable speaking up, right? When we know sometimes underrepresented groups, it's just a struggle being in an environment maybe where they're not fully supported. And so for those of us that maybe have a privilege in that moment, we can speak up and help them. And I think to help others, to help underprivileged or underrepresented groups. And I think at the end of the day, what I'm always reminded of is if you are genuine and you're thoughtful in the way that you start those conversations, the way you ask those questions, and you're really willing to hear what you're told and learn from it, take the time to learn and to process, I don't think you're very likely to offend anybody. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how to have courageous cultural conversations and different maybe tips and tricks of how to do that. You'll see 5 different points here on the slide, and I think some are self-explanatory in terms of doing your research. And again, we'll provide some resources throughout this presentation about how to do that research. But I think what you can do on your college campus is learn about diversity positions and or committees that are at your school and how those are helping affect your office and your work in admissions. Here at Elon, we have the Provost Inclusive Community Team, and this is a group of senior leadership at the institution who are having monthly conversations about what is the climate on Elon's campus, how can we change, adjust to what the students need. We want to be very student-focused and student-centered, being that, number one, those are the stories that we're telling when we are out on the road. Those are the stories that we're telling on the website. And that those are the people that are ultimately affected by the different choices that are different things that we do on our college campus. I think asking questions is really important. I think talk about a lot about ignorance when we talk about diversity and inclusion work. But if you don't know, you don't know. And I think the intent behind questions can be very genuine. I think it's asking those questions in the right setting. And having a trusted relationship with whomever you are asking those questions to. But you don't know unless you know. Networking. I think we could talk all day long, especially in SACAC, about networking. Meeting these people via Dry Run has been such a privilege, and I use them throughout this work because, like Christina said, we don't claim to be experts, but we are certainly passionate about this work. And things that we do here at Elon will be different at another institution, which will be different at another institution. But being able to network with people, even as you see who's on this webinar now, can be really impactful. And then asking about different training opportunities and cultural competency. We have our diversity ambassador tour guides here at Elon, and a lot of them always ask, well, shouldn't everybody be a diversity ambassador? And shouldn't we be training everyone? And absolutely, and we certainly do. But we want to be sure also that we are involving our campus partners. So we use the Center for Race, Ethnicity, and Diversity Education to come in and work with those students. So we can say all of our student tour guides have had training by the CREED. The CREED puts on different programming for us as staff members, right? So that we can better ourselves and interact in more positive ways. We have, for example, we call it the Racenicity series over the summer, which is once every month. Some staff members get together for lunch and we have these difficult conversations. We build that trust among one another, but we are working to better ourselves so that we can work to better our students and the culture that we have here on our campus. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, but I think ultimately understanding your institutional priorities, number one, what's available, but then what are the opportunities to create these different committees at your institution. You can really see the effects of these afterward. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christina now to talk a little bit about bias and stereotypes.
Thank you, Courtney. It's a great transition in talking about asking these important questions and having these insightful conversations. And we're sort of shifting it over to having these conversations, even starting within our own individual selves. I think it's important to set that stage because in thinking about what we do in our field, whether we're on the high school side or the college side, our interaction is majority with people. We're dealing with students and families, colleagues, parents. I mean, the list goes on, but a majority of what we do in our career is interacting with individuals. And so it's important to look within ourselves and talk about biases and stereotypes and how we can counteract and leave those at the door when we are working with different individuals. First, I wanted to start off by just giving quick definitions of both implicit and unconscious biases as well as stereotypes. So with the bias side, this refers to attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, or our decisions unconsciously. And then when thinking over on the stereotype side, this means that we are making assumptions or quick judgments of particular qualities to a member of a certain group. Now, again, I talked about this a second ago, but it is so important because we are driven by how we interact with individuals, how our actions are done, our behaviors, and our decision-making. And this can all start in our mind and in our self-conscious as well as maybe in our consciousness as well. I also want to make it clear that when I'm talking about biases and stereotypes, I'm not just limiting that to race and ethnicity. That certainly is a part of the conversation, but I do want to make it clear that when I'm talking about that, I'm also thinking about aspects like age, gender identities, physical abilities, religion, socioeconomic statuses. There are so many ways that we can look at this discussion, and the list can go on, but just by listing those few just now, we can really see how we're interacting with different families who are under all of those categories and more. And moving on and thinking about looking within ourselves, I think it's important to know that this is a daily process. We're not going to be able to overcome these biases or stereotypes and be done forever. This is a daily conversation that we have to have with ourselves and that we have to constantly check within ourselves before, during, and after we have these interactions. At a college fair, during a school visit, meeting with families. This is a daily process because it's what we do in our daily lives as individuals in our career. It's also important to look within your circle. We've made this point already, but I think thinking about who are in your friend circles, who are you having lunch with in your office, how are you connecting professionally, and is there room for growth to expand that circle? The answer is always yes, by the way. We can always expand our circle. But these are great ways to hold ourselves accountable and also kind of give us that extra backing if we need it so that we're constantly learning and growing. And again, leaving any biases and stereotypes at the door and coming to a family with a clear and objective mindset and being able to meet them where they're at. So I am now going to turn it over to Aisha, who is going to now cover microaggressions.
All right, thanks, Christina. I think it's important when we're talking about biases and stereotypes to understand and really embrace that we all have some form of bias or stereotype associated with how we perceive people or groups of people or populations across the world. And I think a lot of that is based on how we were raised, where we were raised, and even TV and movies and pop culture. All of those things impact the bias and stereotypes that we may have. The most common way that these biases or stereotypes come out are in the form of microaggressions. If you have not heard this term before, I highly, highly encourage you to do some research after this webinar, as it is something that happens every single day. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, it happens every day in our personal lives and our professional lives as well. So simply defined, it is oftentimes a small verbal or nonverbal thing or action or statement that is said to someone that portrays a negative message that's associated with a stereotype or how we feel about a certain population or group of people. A lot of times it does reaffirm or repeat those stereotypes that we have. And a lot of times we kind of brush it off as something small, right? So we'll say something like, oh, I didn't mean that, or it was just a joke. But in reality, there is something that is deep rooted that allows someone to come up with something to say that affects that person in that way. A microaggression, a lot of times, like I said, it's unintentional. It comes up in day-to-day conversations. There are things that I personally hear or see in my daily life, personal life, and professional life that's related to a microaggression. It's commonly referred to as a paper cut. It would be compared to a paper cut. So the first time you get a paper cut, you're like, oh, that's annoying, but I'll make it through the day. But if that same thing keeps happening or that same thing is said over and over and over again, it can feel like death by a million paper cuts, and you're no longer able to push through sometimes. So just keep that in mind with those small slights that oftentimes we just say, not kind of thinking through exactly, but it's really, really can affect a person in the long run. A simple way to kind of capture a microaggression or that topic of microaggressions, I highly recommend that you go on YouTube and type in "where are you from?" And it is this video that really addresses this concept of microaggressions in our daily lives. It does it in a humorous way, so it's definitely easy to digest, but it is real. It's a reality that so many people face every single day, and that video really captures that. I want to talk about a few examples on this next slide to kind of show you, or maybe you've heard these things at some point in your daily life, to give you examples of microaggressions. So the first one reads, you have a mental disability, you seem perfectly normal to me. So that captures this idea of what is normal, right? Or that someone that suffers or deals with something on the daily as it relates to their mental disability or their mental health can't be this idea of normal. When in reality, no one is normal. Everyone has features about themselves that makes them unique and special. So this idea of normal, in my opinion, needs to get out of here. That idea that they can't function or can't go throughout life with whatever they're going through, whatever they're facing, it can be very offensive to some. Another example of this is you speak really good English for an immigrant. There are hundreds of languages all across the world. English is not the only one. And it also creates this idea that English is the end-all be-all language. It may be used a lot in the world, but it's not the only one. And in reality, many people from other countries outside of the US speak more than one language. So English is oftentimes their third or their fourth or their fifth language that they're learning. And that can just be really offensive when they're coming into a new country and trying to pick up on the language. In reality, it's not their first language, so we need to be respectful of that. The third example really affects and talks about the idea of gender roles. So it talks about a man staying home with his family and identifying the woman as wearing the pants in their relationship. This idea of gender roles is brought up in the same fashion of asking a woman why she's not married or why she hasn't had kids yet. In all honesty, just take a step back and really recognize that everyone doesn't want the same things. Everyone doesn't want to be married, even everyone doesn't want to have kids. So really asking that question, maybe everyone's not able to have kids, asking questions like these can be really offensive. Then also taking it a step further with this example, how do we know this guy is married to a woman? We don't. So really just taking a step back and just avoiding those personal types of questions can help you not make assumptions and not be offensive. And then the last example, I see this quite frequently actually, identifying what someone looks like and associating that with where they're from or where they're born. It is 2019, so people live all over the world and look all different types of ways. So we can't necessarily associate what someone looks like or the clothing that they wear with where they were born. At the end of the day, Like I said, we all have biases and stereotypes, and we all probably have said or done something related to one of these examples that I've talked about here. And that is okay. We will make mistakes, and that's okay in any area of our life. But what is not okay is to let it to continue happening. So moving forward, just try to be more mindful of your language. Take a second to think about what you're about to say to someone and how it could be offensive to that individual. I'm now going to pass it off to Stephen just to share why these conversations are so important in our profession specifically.
Thank you. So when it comes to our role as higher education, professionals, and specifically in admissions, it's huge to have these conversations because we are working with such a wide range of student, from the traditional 18 years old right out of high school to dual enrolled students that are still in high school to, that student that's trying to get a degree that's much older, plus you got people from all over the country, all over the world, all over, every type of background, which is really exciting. But it adds to, us being careful with our words, with our actions, and with the knowledge that we know within our field, as well as specifically within our institution. So it's great to have these conversations because, like Aisha said, if I mess up and I say something that I probably shouldn't have to a colleague of mine, I want to have that conversation and want someone to say, you know what, Stephen, this did offend me, or this is why that is hurtful language and things of that nature. So when we talked about at the beginning how there is that fear to have these conversations, it really can be scary, but with our hopefully with our group of people in our office or the people that we meet through our different governing boards like SACAC, NACAC, and GACRO, and all these different great opportunities, that we can have that trust to be able to have these conversations and to grow with each other, to say, hey, this is great, keep that up, you're doing great work at Elon with your recruitment efforts, or you know what, Stephen, I don't think you should be using this term or phrasing it in this way because that might be not sensitive to the students you're working with or to your other colleagues in the office or in the field. And it helps to learn other personal experiences. Going through college, there's some really cool opportunities that any student can take advantage of in terms of different mentorship programs or going through different offices that helped these students grow throughout college. So I might not have gone through a mentorship program, but learning about what that mentorship program offered to a colleague of mine or a student that I've worked with, that then allows me to then share that information in a better way to my prospective students that I'm working with, to say, yes, I know someone that went through this mentorship program, and it really helped them, and this is how you can get plugged in as well. So it helps build that connection and share an experience that, even though it's not my experience, I've learned from a colleague or other students to say, hey, I can better relate to you and share some really cool information that might make your experience at this institution an even better one and allow you to grow and to have that great support system. So it's a really it's terrifying to have these conversations at times, but then it's really exciting because I've learned so much. Now kind of associate this group with, oh, you were the sensitivity people at Dry Run and at SACAC. And so it's fun to now kind of have that on our plates to say, yes, we are open to these conversations. We want to have these conversations and we want to grow and develop these relationships in a more meaningful way. So I'm going to pass it back to Aisha, who's going to give us some tips and tricks.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. So we've thrown a lot at you in the last 40 minutes or so. And whenever having these types of conversations, it can always feel like, where do I start? How do I begin this process? Or maybe you're in the process of improving your areas and you're like, well, what's my next step? I'm going to be honest with you all. This group still gets nervous having these types of conversations, not only with each other, but with our peers. via this webinar or sessions at SACAC, and that's okay. But we've provided a list for you all of tips that we have used personally from other colleagues that have helped us kind of go through this day-to-day process of improving and extending our network and really embracing our role in this profession. So I want to briefly go through these with you all. So number one, accept that you're going to mess it up and take it one step at a time. I don't think anyone on this webinar can say they've never made a mistake as it relates to anything. So just accept that you're going to mess it up, and that's okay. Take it one step at a time, one day at a time, just as you did when you got in this profession and learned the different ways to recruit or whatever your area is. Then number two, state your intentions. So if you want to learn about a specific population or a specific group of people, say that. If you want to understand more about your colleague's background and where they come from, say that and be really honest and open. As Charlotte mentioned earlier in the webinar, if you come from a genuine place, it's very hard to believe that you would offend someone. So just admit what you're trying to gain from this conversation and go from there. And then number three, do your research. And whether that is picking up a book or doing a Google search, Google is our friend, or sitting down with a colleague that you trust and that trusts you and really just digging deep into this conversation. And then I have a few do not do's. So number four, do not make your argument oppressive against other groups. So when having this conversation, I identify as a Black woman. I want to be mindful to not offend any other group that I do not identify with, while until also sharing my story. Then number five, do not tone police or tell people how they should feel. Tone policing is a conversation that we have a lot with my peers, but just being mindful that based on where they come from or how they were raised or just their tone. My dad is retired military, so my tone's a little bit firmer than a lot of people. So being mindful to not tone police or tell people how they should feel based on a certain topic because you don't know where they come from or how they feel about it. And then number six, do not force people into discussions based on how they identify. So if you do want to have a conversation about people of color, or you do want to have a conversation about a particular group of people, being mindful to not go to a person of that group and just assuming that they want to talk about it. Definitely ask and, be mindful and ask if you can have that conversation, but don't assume that they want to be a part of that conversation. I see this a lot in higher education by putting a person of color over multicultural recruitment. Very oftentimes, we are passionate about it, but you can't assume that that's what they want to do based on the group that they identify with. Just being mindful of that. And then number seven, do not make it about you. It is not about you, regardless of the conversation. Listen to the person, hear where they're coming from, get to the root of it all. But at the end of the day, if you're using I a lot in the conversation rather than you, you're probably making it about you. Or if the situation does not relate to you at all and you still find a way to get defensive or offended, you're probably making it about you. So try your best not to do that. And if you can't remember to do all that, or you just want one big thing to take with you, always at the end of the day, ask yourself, am I trying to be right or am I trying to do better? A lot of times we enter conversations like these and are looking for the right answer or trying to be right or trying to have the final word. And that is not the goal that you should have in mind. At the end of the day, the question you should be asking yourself is, am I trying to be better? All of these conversations will not end pleasantly. You will end in arguments sometimes and frustrations. But as long as you're trying and you're trying to be better, you're getting to the ultimate goal of cultural humility. And that is the ability to have these conversations in a professional, respectful manner. We also have a few different resources that we're going to share with you that Stephen's going to share with you on this next slide, and then we'll take some questions.
So yes, this conversation definitely does not end here, and we're excited to continue this conversation in future meetings and conferences and just in our travels on the road. We run into a lot of you on the road and want to continue these conversations. So please, consider going to SACAC and or NACAC. There are people there that want these conversations and need these conversations. So we want to be able to continue that at these higher levels. There's some really amazing Facebook groups. The Accept group had an amazing session at SACAC where they dove into this and are doing major things in the field and sharing amazing work of what people are doing to combat some of the issues that we're seeing in our field, but also just having really good dialogue about how we can be better. And then Wonder Woman in Admissions, just a great resource for our women in admissions to kind of navigate this world of admissions and what it's like to be a woman in this field, and having that support system of other women in this field, which is really exciting. So those are great groups to be able to join. See if your school offers safe space training or any other training that would relate to a group that you want to learn more about it and be able to serve as a resource for. So that's just a great way to start internally at your office or at your institution. See what trainings are already being offered so that you can be a better support system and resource. We travel a lot all over our states or all over the country, some of us even internationally. So instead of listening to music, maybe turn on a TED Talk or a podcast so you can take advantage of those long drives or long flights and dive into this topic here. And look into campus resources and see what is going to be a valuable resource for the students that you're recruiting, and how you can best promote those resources and be accommodating to all the students that might be a great fit for it. And then we list out some really great books here, and there's so many others out there. But Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. So you want to talk about race, the new Jim Crow, and then white fragility. So some really great options to really dive into this if you've been having these conversations for years, or you're finally to that point where you want to get into this and dive deeper into this topic. We wanted to provide this for you as a good starting point. But that's really all that we have for you right now. But we did want to open it up for questions so that we can just see if there's anything else out there.
Thanks, Stephen, and everyone for such an informative webinar. If you haven't asked your question and it's on your mind, please take a moment and drop it in the Q&A box. But we already have some that we'll work through, which I'm really excited about. But first, on the note of recommendations and ways to keep the conversation going, I know a few of you are going to be at a conference coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is and why you might recommend it?
Yes, I'll go ahead and take this one. So NACAC sponsors a conference over the summer called Guiding the Way to Inclusion. And this is a conference that focuses on diversity, inclusion, sensitivity, etc. A fantastic opportunity where there are small groups. You have experienced mentors at this conference that meet regularly. This is not a conference only for admissions professionals of color or admissions professionals that identify within a minority group. It's a fantastic professional development opportunity to expand your knowledge, ask those tough questions, learn about how your office can be better in this work, how you can be better personally in this work. I attended it about 3 years ago, and it flipped my whole world upside down, and I'm very excited to hopefully attend again this summer.
Thanks, Courtney. So we got a question about the new encompassing term GSM, which stands for Gender and Sexual Minority. What are your thoughts on using this term rather than many of the variations of LGBT in your communities, or what do you know about this term? I think, Charlotte, were you going to answer this one?
Yeah, I'll take a whack at it. Just sort of stressing, I'm definitely not an expert. I am fairly new to even knowing about this term. I think sometimes it's also referred to as SGM, so sexual and gender minority. I think the biggest thing here is if you want to start using this term in your community, in your office, have that conversation with folks. How does it look for the community that you're going to be working with? It is an umbrella term, and so the goal behind it, as I understand it, is to be sort of more all-encompassing, more all-inclusive. I think sometimes you hear about alphabet soup, right? Because it can be LGB, LGBTQ. As Courtney said, LGBTQIA tries to be really inclusive. But by saying GSM, then we're hopefully including everybody and allowing people that space to be a little bit more ambiguous. But it's definitely a term that, in my understanding at least, is a little bit newer. And so just be mindful if you use this term, maybe outside of like your office, that folks may not understand what you're saying, and so you may have to sort of introduce them or explain it to them a little bit more. But that fact certainly doesn't prevent you from doing it, and definitely any way to be more inclusive is a good thing, I think.
Great, thank you. So we got 2 questions from people attending around the idea of, one, how do you get your white colleagues to, identify and join the conversation in your offices about diversity and access and inclusion? And then another question that I think goes along with that is, if you are the diversity person in your office, or you're the person of color in your office, how do you help combat the idea that all families of color who come to campus should interact only with you? To kind of widen that perspective?
Yeah, I'll try to take an answer at this question. I think we all could probably add something to this question. As far as it relates to the first part of, or the first question, getting your white colleagues to engage in conversations about this, I'll start with saying, if you are not at a place where you're okay with no sometimes, or maybe it's just not happening that year, then it's probably not a good idea to bring it up right now, because the reality is you're going to get a no at some point. Or maybe a not right now. For me personally, it is something that I am very passionate about. So even if it is just having those conversations one-on-one with colleagues, or maybe having kind of a separate set of training for those that are interested, you could start there. I'm very fortunate to have leadership that believes in this area as well, and really puts a pride in this. So we actually had safe zone training built into our winter mandatory admissions training for all admissions counselors last year. We haven't always done that, but it was something that was brought up maybe a few years ago, and it kind of was like, I don't know, we'll see. And then last year we asked who was interested, and by, far and large, everyone was interested. And so I think sometimes maybe just asking who is interested in learning more about this. I think we assume sometimes that no one is interested but you, or but the people of color, or whatever that means for your office. So maybe just starting there. And then what was the second question again, Erin?
So if you are somebody in your office who's the point person for diversity or inclusion, or if you happen to be the person of color in your office, how do you not make family or have coworkers who feel like all those questions should go to you, or all people of color should?
Sure. So in my office, particularly, I'm not our multicultural diversity recruiter, but I am a person of color. So naturally on event days, families will naturally walk up to me and they want to ask me because I look like them, and I can probably relate a little bit better to them than other members of my office. And I see that 2 different ways. I appreciate that they have someone that they can come to ask those questions and get an honest answer. But at times it can be like, talk to other people, they're great too. And they can provide you with the same information as well. But I think a resource that we shared, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? If you haven't read that book, it'll really help you understand why that happens so much, why the people of color come up to you at an event day or at a visit and they want to talk to you. Because most times you will see things through their lens a little bit more clearly than someone that is white or not like them. So I definitely don't say take it as offensively. I would say, answer their questions, be there for them. And then when they are comfortable with you, what I've seen most times is that they will go to other people in your office and they'll realize that, oh, wow, y'all are all pretty cool and you all are great. But I wanted to start with you. And it just kind of provides a comfort level for them. I see it the same way as students talking to current students, right? I don't have street cred anymore. I'm an admissions counselor. I'm a professional. They don't want to talk to me, prospective students. They want to talk to current students. And so we try to put those populations together as much as we can as well.
That's great. Thank you. This is kind of in that same vein. But if you bring up the question, you ask the question in your office, who's interested in this? And you get a no. Or you get a no from your administration, or just any other kind of bump in the road. Personally, how do you stay encouraged, to be in this space and to do this kind of work?
I will say sometimes I am discouraged. It's not always easy. This work is not easy for any of us. But if it's something you're passionate about, anything you're passionate about, whether it's this topic, whether it is buying a new house, or, pursuing a master's or a professional program, there are going to be rough patches in that. And you just have to continue to push through. I would also encourage you to get a circle, surround yourself with higher education professionals that are passionate about this as well, even if they aren't at your institution. There are several women and men across this profession that I can call when I'm having a rough day, when I feel a little discouraged, and I can say, hey, can we talk this through? How would you respond to this so you don't feel so alone?
If I can chime in there, I would say jump back to our resources page, get involved in some of those online groups if you feel like you don't have a network yet of folks that you know personally. You know, on a day when I feel discouraged, all it takes is like spending a little while on the Accept Facebook page or the Wonder Women in Admissions page to really feel inspired and fired up again. Sometimes also maybe disappointed in the state of the world, but knowing that there's a lot of folks out there that feel the way that I do. I think the other thing would be, you know, we're doing this for the students, right? We work in college admissions for the students. So just get out and spend some time with your students. And I think that will remind you that there are, you know, students out there that need you and your advocacy in whatever way. And so that's what inspires me, even if all that I'm doing is, you know, like I can't get any support in my office for change. I can be the one that when I say, you know, where's the restroom? I don't say, oh, the women's bathroom is there, right? But I say, you know, women's bathroom is over here, men's bathroom is over here, we have a gender bathroom over there, right? I've now not decided what this person's identity is, right? You can be doing little things that hopefully slowly over time can change the culture in your office. And at least that's, you can feel like you're making an impact, even if it's just on a small scale.
So that was a really great specific example. And this next question is really going to drive into some specifics. So in your different admission offices, what are essential admission practices that you should be doing as an institution to promote inclusion and diversity in your actual process with students? And if you have specific examples, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I would say one of them is have your students go through your application process and see, hey, where is maybe equity not being taken into account, or look at your materials that you're putting out on your website and what you're handing out in the on the road. Is it you know, 3 students and a tree with, you know, the token different you know, places that we put our students to promote, oh yes, we have students of color, or we have students from other countries, but really having maybe getting a group of students together to say, hey, look at our materials. What does this say to you? If you were to get this again, you know, would this be representative of what you would want to see as a student coming back to this institution? And really getting their perspective on your process and the materials you're putting out to see, hey, are we doing a good job of promoting the inclusion and diversity at this institution?
If I could add something to that, I think training your admissions counselors to recruit in the territory that they are assigned to, setting them up for success. We have a band across our state in Alabama that's known as the Black Belt, and the schools look significantly different than they do in North Alabama. So we want to make sure that we're preparing our counselors in their messaging to be more inclusive and to be more sensitive of the school systems, and to be more aware of who are they recruiting, to make sure that we're not just treating every student as the same. So I think that the more that we can prepare not only our admissions professionals, but also our student representatives that represent our organization, our institution, to not only recruit one type of student, but all students. I think that is helpful. That little bit of language changes that Charlotte mentioned, where the restrooms are, or even the minor things of, you know, stating your pronouns, if you're comfortable with that, really opens the door for students that may be uncomfortable. And it is something that is so small that if you're really not concerned about it, you don't notice it. But when you do care about it, it's big as day. So little things like that. And then training of your staff as well in your yearly trainings. Every office is different, but making sure that some piece of it incorporates diversity and inclusion training.
I would also say, kind of backing off of the training aspect, is partnering with our offices that are already established on your campus as well. Like the University of Kentucky has an awesome inclusion and diversity department, and we partner with them all the time. So that way we're updated, we're understanding that how we're speaking to families and students, we're understanding the languages. Even something like first gen, like, are we communicating things to first gen students that we just assume they might know, But kind of having this information and partnering up with programs that are already established on our campus, that really helps as well with the support system too.
I think, Charlotte, you have one more example, and then we'll do our last question.
Yes. So I think a lot of us know, right, that a tour can kind of make or break an experience. So, you know, definitely being mindful of how you train your tour guides. One of the things that I hadn't thought of until it came up in conversation recently was about accessible tours. So making sure that either your tour is inherently accessible for everybody, or if you can't do that, if that makes it, you know, longer or whatever, that your tour guides can switch on a dime and they know how to give an accessible tour without fumbling. Where I work now, we're one of the first campuses that was fully wheelchair accessible. But what I discovered recently is that our tour guides actually don't know where all the elevators are on campus. So this summer we're revamping that so that they can go to every elevator and there's no, I think it's over here, that kind of thing. And the other thing is, don't assume that a family is capable of taking stairs and things like that. So building into the conversation, do you want to take an elevator or the stairs? Because, you know, maybe somebody has difficulty walking, but it doesn't show, right? Or maybe they just aren't going to enjoy a tour because it's taxing for them if they have to take the stairs. And so that can really make a difference.
Great, thank you guys. And so our last question is, if you are the diversity or multicultural coordinator or just somebody who has a passion for this in your office, what's a tip that you have to talk about your ideas with your leadership to really get something pushed forward?
I'm going to chime in on this one. I think when you want to have these conversations with leadership, it's super important to come with all of your information, all your ducks in a row. Figure out where your institution stands, but also what other trainings you've gotten, what kind of feedback you can provide, and put it together, kind of format it in a report so you can present it to them. I find more often than not, when you go to leadership with ideas, they want to see full circle. Okay, what have you learned? What are you bringing to the table? What's the outcome you're looking for? And when you present it in that way, they're typically a little bit more open to considering it. So that would be kind of my best advice to start those conversations, is come with that information ready and share it.
And if I might, I'll also add the importance of having relationships with campus partners when doing this work is so important. So if you can have a report, as Crystal says, of how it could operate in your own institution and then maybe a best practice at another school, but having the support from multiple areas, that means that you've come equipped with an entire team behind you, backing whatever idea it is and showing that this is what we're going to do. Step 1, 2, 3, and 4, we can execute it on this timeline. I have the support of this office and these students in order to do this. It just makes it all more tangible for them when they say yes, no, or maybe.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This was a fantastic discussion, but the conversation never ends. So please continue these conversations on your campuses. Feel free to reach out to any of our participants directly with questions. Their resources, contact information, and a recording of this webinar will be available on the SACAC webpage soon. And we look forward to seeing you again for our next webinar. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.